Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Chaf Zayin. Yesterday we learned the Mishnah. Let's just review the main highlights of the Mishnah. There's a contrast between Shchitas Ha'of and Shchitas Behema. In both cases, we apply the principle of Rov, but in the case of an oaf, all we need is the Shchita of one Simon. In contrast, in Behema, we need two Simonim. And according to the strict letter of the law, Rov, if you shecht most of the simon, not half, but most, then the shechita is kshera. Rabbi Yehuda adds another condition in the shechita of an oaf, and that is that you have to cut the vridim, which facilitates removing the blood, meaning that if you also cut the main blood vessels, the jugular veins, then the blood is going to come out. If, on the other hand, he only shechted half of the simon in an oaf, or in a behema he shechted one simon and half of the second simon, because behema requires two simonim, then shchitasa psula, but rov echad biof rov shnai behema. The Mishnah at the end repeats what it started with, and the Gemara is going to try to figure out why. So now the Gemara asks the following question: Hashochet. The language of Hashochet implies the evid in lechatchila lo, that if he went ahead and he shechted in the post facto, then we can validate his shchita. But lechatchila, that's not acceptable. So the Gemara asks, what are you talking about? In the case of Behema, for example, he shechted two simonim. That's what it says in the Mishnah. And lechatchila lo, you're telling me that that's not lechatchila. His adkama lishchot v'lezel. How much more can he cut? He cut the entire two simonim. So Gemara offers two answers to this question. Ibai saying, according to the first answer, then what's b'di'eved? Echad b'of. It means that even though, according to Torah law, in the case of an oaf, all you have to do is shecht one of the two simonim, either the kana or the veshet, which means either the trachea or the esophagus. Nevertheless, the Rabbanon required that you shecht both simonim. And the reason why the Rabbanon went that far is because they were afraid if you would only shecht one simon, then you might come to shecht less than rov of the simon. So to be on the safe side, the Rabbanon said shecht both simonim of the oaf. Ibai Seima. Now the Gemara offers a second interpretation of B'di'eved in the Mishnah, and that is Arubo Shalechad Kamohu. It's not with regard to whether he shechts only one simon instead of both simonim, but rather the question is whether he shechted most of the simon or all of the simon. And once again, we're saying that the Rabbanan said even though he didn't shech the entire simon, which midaraisa is perfectly kosher, even lechatchila, but the Rabbanan, they don't want to rely on rov because they're afraid if you start playing around with rov, then maybe he'll shecht less than rov of the simon, and then midaraisa it's possible. Better to require that he sever the entire simon, and then we won't get into problems with shechting less than rov simon. Now here we want to introduce the shita of the Rif. And this has to do with halacha l'maisa. The Rishonim, other than the Rif, will accept both answers of the Gemara, which means that they'll require, in the case of Oaf, shchitas two simanim, as a rabbinic gzera, and they'll require that you shech the entire simon. So we're taking the chumras of both Lashonos in the Gemara. That's all the Rishonim except for the Rif. The Rif, on the other hand, says that we have a principle called halacha kebasra, that when you have two Lashonos in the Gemara, we always rule in favor of the last Lishna. And therefore, we don't accept the first answer that if he only shechted one simon in an oath, that's b'di'eved, and it's not lechatchila, but rather lechatchila he could shech one simon. We only accept the second lishna that he's got to shech the entire simon lechatchila. Now, once we're touching on lechatchila and b'di'eved, I want to mention that Rabbi Yehuda, as Tosfos explains, who says that in oath you have to cut the veins, the jugular veins. That's also, says Tosfos, only lechatchila. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't deny that the shechita of an oath is kshera, it's perfectly valid, even if he didn't cut the vridim, the jugular veins. But in addition to shechita, there's another law of dam, that we have to remove the dam from the behema. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda, on a level of lechatchila, requires that you cut the jugular veins to make sure that the blood will flow out. Okay. Now we get to the main sugya for today. And that is called Minayin L'Shchita Shehi Min Atzavar. And we're going to have Rav Kahana, we'll have Rav Yemar, we'll have Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, many alternate answers to this question. How do we know that the shechita is from the throat? And this question really breaks down into two sub-questions. Number one, maybe shechita could be to cut a different limb of the body of the animal. Gemara is going to present the possibility of cutting the tail of the animal, cutting the ear of the animal, so forth and so on. And subcategory number two is, even if I grant you that the shechita has to be in the simonim area, the throat, but maybe you could do it mina oref, you could do it from the back, instead of shechting from the front, you shech from the neck. In any event, Rav Kahana says the following. Now, both Rav Kahana and subsequently Rav Yemar are going to apply the method of nutrikon. Nutrikon means when I take one word and I break it down into two, or more than two. So now we're learning Rav Kahana. His notrika will be from the word v'shachat. He's going to take the word v'shachat and split it into two. Whereas Rav Yemar, coming around the bend, is going to derive shchita min atzavor from v'zavachta, and he's going to take that word and divide it into two. So let's start with Rav Kahana. Shenemar v'shachat es ben habakar. So now we're in the parsha of Behema, and the Torah used the word v'shachat. And we're going to break down the word v'shachat into two segments. Mimakom sheshach. So the shin of shchita is the beginning of the word shach. And then chatehu. Then we're going to take the ches and we're going to use it as the beginning of the word chet. Chet, tet. Now, what do these two words mean? So shach means to bow. And chet, Rashi offers two interpretations. Let's first mention the first one, to cleanse and remove all the dam. So therefore, mimakom sheshach, the part of the body that bends down is around the throat. Chateu, that's where you clean out all the dam by shechting around the throat area. So the Gemara immediately objects. Mimai dahai chateu lishna did dakuyehu. Now here, Rashi has two interpretations, and it's based on two different gersos, two texts of the Gemara. The text as we have it in the printed Gemara says, Dechuye. Dechuye means to cleanse. And therefore, we're going to prove from different psukim that the word chateu means to cleanse, to clean it of its dam. However, Rashi offers another interpretation, according to which chateu means to purify it. What that means is that if the animal dies without shchita, then it's metame tumas nevela. So therefore, by shechting the animal, you remove the tumas nevela. And then you have to change the girsa from derchuye to ture, to purify. So the Gemara says, "V'ema." Now the two psukim. So the chsiv, one pasuk in the parsha of Nigoim, of Nigei Batim, it says "V'chita es habayis," which either means to clean up the house, meaning take out everything in the house, so that when the Kohen decides that you need what's called nitzitza and you have to destroy the house, then you don't destroy what's in the house. Or the word v'chita means to purify the house from tumas negoim. Ibai same another pasuk mehacha, and the second pasuk is referring to tshuva, to Tehillim Perek Nun Aleph, I believe. Nun Aleph is the Perek of tshuva. Techateu bi ezov ve'etoher. So if you take the pasuk literally, it's referring to the process of Tara, because in Tara, for example, in Mitzorah, you need a hyssop, which is called an ezov in the Torah law, and v'toyer, and that's how you purify it. Or techateu means to cleanse, just to remove any kind of any kind of dross. So the Gemara asks, "V'ema means novo." Maybe the shechita should be done from the animal's tail. The tail is always bent over, and the word it says shach means it bends. Michlal implying shezakuf beina, that although it bends, it's usually straight. So the head of the animal is usually straight, and then when it eats, it bends. But the tail of the animal is always bent. Now, when I was a child, they read us children's books, and at some point the tail actually, when it wags its tail, the animal, like the dog, gets very excited. I think the tail sort of like, straightens out. Is that so, or that's just in children's books? I don't know. Anyway, that's, I guess, unusual, but as a general rule, the tail is down. The emami ozno, maybe we should cut the ozen, the ear of the animal, and then the blood will flow from the ear. Now, apparently, when the animal bends down to eat from the food and the grains on the ground, the ears also bend down. The whole head of the animal bends down. So therefore, the ozen would be included on the shach. But the Gemara rejects it because be'inan dam hanefesh v'leka. Shchita requires that the blood that gives life to the body of the animal be removed. Now, in the note here, he points out that there are three different categories of blood, according to halacha. This is not a chemical or biological classification. But according to halacha, there's something called dam hanefesh, which is the first blood that comes out, the lifeblood. And then there's dam hatamtzis, which is blood that oozes out. And then finally there's dam evarim, which is dam that was absorbed in the organs of the body. So we learned from Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin that in the case of Zevach Behema al Gabi Mizbeach, we need to do Hazoya on the Mizbeach. We have to sprinkle the dam on the Mizbeach. And what we have to do is we have to get the dam hanefesh. And we're going to apply that requirement of dam hanefesh, the lifeblood, to shchita. And when you cut the ear of the animal, it doesn't cause the bleeding of the lifeblood, but rather that's only dam evarim. The ema dekara v'ozel adam nefesh. Maybe he should start cutting from the ear until he cuts all the way down to the neck and the throat, and then you have dam nefesh. But you have to start with the ozen, with the ear. And at this point in the Gemara sort of raises its hands and its arms in the air and says, I don't have really an answer to that. So therefore, I'm going to have to prove to you that Shchita ben Etzaver is halacha l'Moshe Misinai, that we really cannot derive it from any pasuk. Shehia drasa chaloda agroma v'ikur binolam. All the 5 psulei Shchita, where do we know them? They're not written in scripture. For example, Shehia means that as he shechts, he takes a break in the middle. He doesn't shecht flowingly, continuously. Drasa means that instead of doing an act of cutting it back and forth, he pushes the knife down. Chaloda means that the knife has to be exposed, as opposed to a case where he tucks the knife under the hide of the animal's neck. Hagrova means when he goes out of the location of the trachea of the veshet. And ikur means when he pulls the 2 simanim rather than cuts them. Ella, grama. Gemara means halacha l'Moshe Sinai. All the 5 psulim are derived from Moshe Rabbeinu Bar Sinai, and therefore shchita min atzaver nami grama. Therefore, once we have halacha l'Moshe Sinai about how to do shchita and what disqualifications apply to shchita, we'll also derive that shchita has to be from the throat. So then, at that point, we have to turn the ball goes back into the court of Rav Kahana, and Rav Kahana now has to face the music. What's he going to do now with the pasuk v'shachat? Krola by Osi, Delo Shavye Gistra. Okay, here we have Machlokas, Rashi, and Tosfos, how to interpret the Gemara of Gistra. According to Rashi, Gistra is when you cut the head off the rest of the body. And that's something that the Torah doesn't want. The Torah wants to cut the simanim while the head is still attached to the body. That's Rashi. Now Tosfos has a different pshat. Just one second. Yeah, Tosfos is going to interpret it in a different way. We'll see it clearly a little bit later on in the sugya that the Beis HaShchita should not be totally exposed, but rather there's a certain part of the body that could cover the Beis HaShchita. In any event, what I wanted to point out to you before we go on is that Tosfos has a slightly different girsa. Tosfos' girsa is v'su ta'amech, which means that according to you, that you're attacking me and you're raising a question of maybe he cuts from the ear all the way down to the throat in order to get to the dam nefesh, then you're going to tell me that that's how I interpret the pasuk v'shachat. So how are you going to derive the other psulei shchita? So therefore, you're going to be forced to face the music on the 5 psulei shchita. Where's that going to be derived from? That's not inherent in the natrikon of v'shachat. Therefore, you're going to have to rely on halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So if you're going to have to rely on halacha l'Moshe Sinai, then that's going to teach you shchita min hatzavor. That's got to be from the throat. So therefore, Rav Kahana says, and according to you, what are you going to do with v'shachat? And that's what the Gemara says, Krolamai Asi Shalotehe Gistera, Shaloteshavye Gistera. Meaning that on the one hand, from Halacha Moshe Sinai, I derive that the throat is the area from which you do the slaughtering. But on the other hand, I don't know if it's from the front of the throat or from the neck in the back. And for that, I learned the L'shavye Gistera. So let me stand corrected. Forget about what the Gemara is going to say later about covering the area of the Beis HaShchita with pader. That has to do only with Kodshim. Here we're learning about Chullin. So I jumped ahead of myself. But in Chullin, the lo l'shavye gisra, according to Tosfos, means that you shouldn't cut from the neck. You should rather cut from the throat, from the front. Okay, Ad Kan Hakofa Aleph, that's Rav Kahana. Now we get to Rav Yemar, Omar Krov is a Vachta. Again, we're going to apply no trikin, but now to the word Zevach, because elsewhere the Torah says slaughtering is called Zvicha. And what is the nutrikin of Zvicha? Mimakom shezav. So we take the Zayin and the Beis, the first two letters of Zvicha, and we put them together, and Zav. Zav means flowing. So where does the blood flow from? That's going to be the throat. And then it's Ches and Tes, Ches and Tov, the last two letters of the word Vizavachta, and that's Chateu. Chateu again means to break it, to sever it. My mashma dahai Chateu lishna de mitbarhu. Where do you find psukim in the Torah that Chateu means to break it? Breaking here means to sever, and severing means that in the place which is called Zav, where the blood flows from, that's where you sever it. Tichsiv al tira va'al techas. Okay, this is a pasuk by Moshe Rabbeinu in Dvarim at the very beginning, and techas means to be broken up psychologically. V'ema mechotmo. Okay, so you want to get a place where the blood is going to flow, maybe from the nose. And you're going to break its nose with a knife, and the blood is going to flow. So the Gemara says, Zav al yidei chitui be'inan. Right, chitui means to break it. V'hai zav me'elavhu. So the Gemara is now saying that what's going to flow from the nose? There's not going to be a flowing of blood. In the worst case scenario, you'll have flowing of mucus coming out of the nose. But really, you punch a guy in the nose, any mucus that comes out is me'elav. Me'elav, the Gemara says, it flows by itself. So it's not a result of your breaking it. V'ema milibo, maybe we should shech the animal in its heart. After all, a lot of blood flows from the heart. Visu, meaning at this point, I don't have an answer to this question, and therefore the only way I can learn Shchita min Atzavar is Shehiyah Drasach Halol Grom Aviko Binolan Ela Gemara, Shchita min Atzavar Nami Gemara. It's all Halach Moshe Sinai. So then again, now we swing back to Rav Yemar, and we have a problem with Rav Yemar. What's he going to do with the word Vizavachta? Ukrolamai Asad L'Shavei Gistra. And once again, we have the Machlokas Rashi and Tosfos, whether the answer of the Gemara is that Vizavachta is telling me that you should not completely sever the head of the animal from the body of the animal, or according to Tosfos, that you don't shech mina oref, but rather minat savo. Now we have a third approach to derive shchita minat savo. Debei Rabbi Shmuel Tona v'shochat al tikri v'shochat el v'sochat. So it seems that in the laws of drushos, when we look at the scripture, we're allowed to switch a sama for a shin. Why? Because since there's no vocalization in the Torah, then the shin could be read as if it were a samach, v'sochat, a sin. And what's v'sochat? What do we gain, according to Debei Rabbi Shmuel, by replacing the shin of v'shochat with a samach? Mimakom shesoch. We're referring to the vocal cords of the animal, which are located obviously in the throat, And that's where the shechit has to be from visachat. Visachat means sach, sicha. And then again, we have the ches and the tes that teaches us chatehu, which again, we had different interpretations. Chatehu means to cleanse or to purify. The emu lashona. But wait a second, the tongue is also one of the organs of vocalization. So if you're talking about sicha, the sicha comes through the tongue. And where it says be'inon dama nefesh v'leka, right? We don't have dama nefesh coming out of the tongue. The ema de kora v'yozel ad dama nefesh. Now we have the TKO. We have the final objection which cannot be resolved. And maybe he should start cutting the tongue until he finally gets down to the throat, and then the dama nefesh comes out. So you can't use visachat as the source for shchita minatzavor. But then again, we're going to have to say visu shchita shehir drasach halal, all the five psulit shchita. Where do we know them from? Minolan, Ela Gemara, shchita minatzavor nami Gemara. Everything is derived from halacha Moshe Sinai. Ukrola Asa. Now, according to the Vei Rabbi Shmuel, why do we need v'shachat v'sachat? And the answer is lo shavi gistra, as we discussed earlier. However, now the Gemara is going to quote a brisa which has a different source from which we derive that shchita is min hatzavor. Tana Maisi Mahachi brings it from the following pasuk. Sanya Rabbi Chia Omar minayin l'shchita min hatzavor shenemar. The Archu b'nei Aaron hakonim es hanisachim. So we're talking about something called aricha. Aricha means placing it on the altar, on the mizbeach. And the word nisachim has to do with nesicha. Nesicha means nesach. We cut up the animal into various pieces, and then we do aricha al gabi mizbeach. We'll soon see that there's a certain sequence that the Torah requires in what you do first and what you do second. She'ein Talmud lomar. But if we look further, right, this pasuk has a sefer. Well, so far, we only quoted the reish of the pasuk, and in the sefer it says it's a rosh ves hapoder. So now we don't understand. Ma Talmud lomar es harosh ves hapoder. I mean, if there's halach of aricha, that's a requirement with regard to nisachim, then the rosh and the poder are also segments of the body, and therefore they fit under the description, the category of nisachim. Why did the Torah have to specify es harosh ves hapoder? Lama yatzu, why were they mentioned specifically? Lefi shenemar, because it says v'fshit es ha'olav v'nisach. There are two processes. First, there's hafshata, which means that you take off the skin, and then you have v'nitach. V'nitach means you sever it into segments. So therefore, the Torah is combining both hafshata with nitach. Ein li ela nisachim sheyeshnam b'chal hafshata. The rush, the head of the animal, is not skinned. And therefore, we would have assumed that it's excluded from Nesach, and therefore, it's not included in Arich al Gabi Mizbeach. Minay l'rabos harush. So now we need a special pasuk. The Torah has to specify rush to teach me that rush is included under the Nesach, and therefore, ipso facto, under the Aricha. Shekfar Hutaz. Now, the Gemara at this point is saying that after the Shechita, which obviously there's no Aricha until after Shechita, it's already Hutaz. It's already been severed. So you cut both the veshet and the kana through shchita. The head is now completely severed. I mean to say, alpidin is considered severed, and therefore it's now a piece which is nisachim, but there's no afshata. Talmud Lomar es harosh ves hapidjo v'arak. Now keep in mind, so far the Brisa has justified the word rosh and not pidro. We'll speak about pidro in just a minute. Mida kames harosh shvakar hutas michal deshchita minatzavar. If you're telling me that the rush was already severed, then l'chora it was severed in the animal's throat. So we know that the general area of shechita has got to be the throat. But the Gemara asks the obvious question: V'tana pasach berosh upodar u'misayim rosho pidro. He starts with one pasuk, ends with another pasuk. Hachi kamer minayin l'ravas harosh. How do we know that the din of aricha includes even the rosh shekvar hutas? Hutas means it's not part of hafshata because it's already been severed. Talmud lomer harosh v'sapodar. So that's one pasuk. Now the Bryce has another pasuk, and the pasuk is rosho upidro. The first pasuk is actually pasuk ches. The second one pasuk yud beis. Lamali. Why do I need rosho and pidro? That in Aricha there's a certain sequence, and first goes the Rosh, then goes the Poder, the Peder, and that's derived from the Pasuk as Rosh Ves Pidro V'Ora. That they are first in the Aricha, in the sequence of Aricha.